Okay, we're up to Nun Hey Amid Aleph, just to finish up this little bit of a sugya. We talked yesterday about if a person is separating dried figs and fresh figs, and he's separating, meiser, trumas meiser. Do you go by the way it is now, or do you go by the way it was? The way it was is they were all fresh at some point, or do you go by the way it is now, which is some dry and some fresh? So the Gemara had said, Umina Amar Rav Elazar bar Rav Yosi, Abba hayanoitel eser groigish miktsoya al tishim shel kakala. My father used to take 10 dried figs on behalf of the 90 fresh figs, meaning when he would separate dried figs for fresh figs, he would not go by volume, he would go by the amount that it was. So we spoke last time that only makes sense if you hold that you go by the way that it was. If you're the way that it was, they were all fresh at some point, so then we look at it as all fresh, then you could take the number. If you go by the way it is now, then, so the Gemara speaks it out. Let's see it inside. The Gemara says, if you go by the way they were initially, then it makes sense, because the way they were initially is they're all fresh. So you look as if they're all fresh, you take 1 out of 10. But Eli Amrit K'moy but if you go by the way it is now, the way it is now, dried figs, if I take 1 out of 10, the dried figs are smaller than the fresh figs, so I'm taking a percentage less than 10%. If you go by the way it is now, and you're separating dry figs from fresh figs, you would have to go by volume. You'd have to figure out, okay, 10 pounds, I'll take 1 pound of dried figs. That's the only way it works. So says the Gemara, meaning, so this is a raya that he goes by the way it was, because if you go by the way it is now, it doesn't work. So the Gemara says a slight deflection. Gregors are different. Dried figs can go back to being plump again. Meaning, it could be when you taka have something that changed. It was A and now it's B, but it's irreversible. Then I don't know what his father would say. I don't know what Rav Elazar Rav Yosi. I don't know what Rav Yosi would say. It could be Rav Yosi taka goes by the way it is now. The only reason why these are figs, by figs, he went by the way it was, which is that he looks at dry figs as if they were fresh because they all started fresh. That's not something that he applies to all cases. That's dafka by figs because even after they dry, they could be replumped and rehydrated. So because the change is reversible, we don't look at it as a finite change. So then we look at it as if the way it was, which is all fresh. But a taka could be, if it was taka a change that's not reversible, then the halacha might be different. Then a taka could be though you go by the way it is now. It's unclear. Okay, a little bit of a side discussion till the Mishnah, and that is taking fresh figs for dry figs. Forget about the percentage and the ratios that we talked about yesterday. Just what are you supposed to take? Now, fresh figs are obviously better tasting and more valuable than dried figs. The only reason why people dry is because they last longer. So Tana Rabbanon, Tarmin te'emin ala gregris, you're able to separate from trumas meiser fresh figs for dry figs. Now, fresh figs are more valuable, so we always want to give the kohen the best product. So giving him fresh makes sense. However, we also don't give a kohen something that will not last a long time. We don't give him something that's going to expire very quickly. So if there is no kohen around, I'm just sort of speaking up what the Gemara is going to say. If there's no kohen around, you can't give fresh figs, separate it, and then there'll be a kohen in the community in 2 months. By that time, fresh figs doesn't just automatically dry. It has to be dried properly. So if I want to separate dried figs, okay, that's a separate story, because at least it'll last. If I separate fresh figs, on the one hand, more valuable, but it doesn't last as long. So it says the Gemara, as long as it's customary for people to take fresh figs and turn them into dry, then it's fine. Because then people will know how to convert it from fresh to dry before the kind arrives. So it's not going to expire. But the opposite, but you're not allowed to separate dried figs for fresh figs because dried are not as chashiv. Even a place where people customarily make fresh figs into dry, so we don't look at it as if all the figs are already dry. No, right now you have dry and fresh. You want to separate fresh, that's more valuable, but it has to be done in a way where it will last long. But if you want to separate dry, that's a problem because dry is not as chashiv as fresh. So here's the question: in these two cases, is there a kohen around? Where basically, I'm going to say it out, so we'll see it inside. Basically, there's a contradiction in the Mishnah in this brisa. The brisa starts off by saying that you separate fresh for dry, as long as there's someone who knows how to convert it. Meaning, obviously, we're talking about a case where there's no kohen. If there's a kohen, then just hand it to the kohen. It must be there's no kohen here for a couple months. Now, I can't just separate fresh figs if it's going to expire before he gets here. For that, the Gemara says, as long as there's someone around who knows how to convert it, it's fine. Separate it and convert it, it's fine. But then the end of the brisa is, I can't separate dry for fresh because it's not as chashiv. But wait a minute, if there's no kain around, then we don't care about chashiv. We care about what's going to last longer. Meaning, yeah, if there's a kain here, we always give him the best stuff. But if you tell me a case, that the first case of the brisa is that there's no kain around for a couple months, then separate dry. It's not as chashiv as fresh. Yeah, but I need something to last. So, there's a bit of a contradiction in the brisa. Is there a kain around or not? Says the Gemara, Amar Ma'ar, time and taimin, al geregris, makom shirgin lasistainim geregris, makom shirgin in makom shein regin loy. The first part of the brisa, you're only able to separate fresh if there's someone who knows how to convert it to dried because we need it to last. Hechidami idek a kain. Now, obviously, if there's a kain available to accept it, then I don't care about converting it to dry. Hand it to the kain. Makom shein regin on my loy. But it's not makom sheishman kain. Tayim and ayafa. If there's a kain around, just get the best stuff and hand it to him. El pshita like a kain. It must be there's no kain around. He's not going to be around for a couple months. So I need something to be able to last. So I could separate fresh, which is the highest quality, but only if it'll last. So as long as there's someone who can convert it, so separate fresh, taste gavaldik, and then they'll be able to convert it. Beautiful. So it means there's no kain around for months. Ema seifa, go to the next case of the brisa. V'lo yirogay yishaltein, and be allowed to separate dried figs for fresh figs because it's not as chashiv. But if there's no kain around for months, then pick something that's going to last the longest. I don't care about chashiv. But I feel makom shirgin lasistainim geregris. V'ida like a kain. But if there's no kain around, amai what's the problem? But tanan. Makom shein kain. The Mishnah clearly states if there's no kain available, Torah minimus kain. We don't care about chashiv. We care about long lasting. So it must be the end of the brises where there is a kayin. So because there's a kayin, and you're handing it to him directly, you have to give him fresh and not dry. So the first part of the brisa is there is no kayin for a couple months. The second brisa there is. So what's going on? So the answer is Reish is like a kayin, save the kayin. Yeah, exactly. Reish is like a kayin, save the kayin. As you have to say, the brisa is talking about a case where in the Reish there's no kayin around, and the save there is. You have no choice. Now the only other alternative would have been to say that the two cases of the brisa are authored by different tanoim. The Gemara says, you see from here, the fact that we went with the approach of first being where there's no kain, second being where there is kain, as opposed to being authored by two different people, the Gemara says, Amar Rav Papa. Rav Papa says, you see from here, Shma mina, dachkina mukmina masnisa b'trei taimi. We'd rather b'doichik, forced to interpret the Mishnah talking about two different cases, or two different circumstances, like no kain and yes kain, v'loi mukmina b'trei tanai, than to interpret it as being authored by two different tanoim. Okay. Zok the Mishnah says, Kol ha-menachos niloshim b'poishin. All menachos are needed with lukewarm water. When you make the mincha dough, we add water to make a dough. We use lukewarm water because that makes the best dough. Cold, it'll make it splotchy, with big pieces. And hot will scald it. So use lukewarm. We have to make sure it doesn't turn into chametz. As we said, there's an isser of making it into chametz. And even if the shirayim becomes chametz, you're also over b'leisasei. Meaning, the isser of making it to chametz is not just the kmitza. Any part of the mincha cannot be turned into chametz. And you're over b'leisasei if you make it into chametz. Shenemar, kol mincha shetikriv l'Hashem lo yisasa chametz. That's the source. Now, v'chayiv. Now, not only are you over alav for making it into chametz, chayiv al yishasei, even when it's a dough, and you need it, you're over alav, al richasei, shaping it, al fiyasei, baking it, meaning any participation in the process of it becoming chametz is going to be lashes. How do I know that there's an issa deraisa of turning into chametz? Not just on the kmitzav, on the shiraim as well. Chelkam means even a chelik, even the part that's not the kmitza, only a part of it, meaning even if the kmitza is not chametz, and only shiraim, so it's only part of it is chametz, chelkam tells you that even a chelik of it, you're over alav. Is that what the pasuk is coming to teach me for? That it's coming to tell me that you're over alav for even on the chelik, the shiraim becoming chametz? I thought we use chelkam, I'll say it outside, we use chelkam to tell you that even if you're only involved in part of the process, you're over alav, meaning, I'm not the one who let it sit for 20 minutes. I'm the one who braided the dough. I'm also over alav, and that's learned out from Chelkam, from the same pasuk. So how could the same pasuk tell me two things? Don't we use this pasuk for a different brisa, for a different source? The brisa says, go to the next page, Lo yisei chametz, you're not allowed to bake it as chametz. Now, the question is, why does the pasuk have to say Lo yisei chametz? There's an isser of baking it. The pasuk already said Lo yisasa chametz, you're not supposed to make it into chametz. Baking is a part of the making process. Because there is a general rule, you're not allowed to be involved in making a chametz. So why does the pasuk specify baking. You might think that you're only chayiv if you're involved in all of the preparatory steps, meaning only if you knead it and shape it and bake it. That's why the pasuk say you're not allowed to bake it. There's an issa derais in the baking. Why? Because you have a klal, which is not making, and then there's a prat of baking. Afia b'chlal hoisa lama yatzis. So why does the pasuk specify lahakish aleh? Right, when you have a klal, and then sometimes a prat is specified to teach you on the entire klal. Lama yatzis lahakish aleh ma afia miyuchedesh yimaisi yachidi. Just like baking is, meaning the pasuk says loisasa, which means don't make it into chametz. But then it says loisiafa. Loisiafa is to tell you, just like baking is one of the steps, and you're over alav, so to any step you're over alav, not just if you do all of it. So therefore you learn from this that if you shape the dough, or you knead the dough, or any other step, sheba you're chayiv. And what's included in that? Zakutinsky, putting water, like they used to, you put like egg on it to shine it. They would put water on the dough to make it shiny. That's also ma'aseh yechidi. It's also preparatory work, and you're over alav. So the question is, how could the same pasuk tell me two things? The pasuk is telling me that you're over for making the shirayim chametz, and the pasuk is also telling me that you're chayiv for every step. The answer is michalkom kamrinon. The answer is the fact that the shirayim is alav is from the word chalkam. The pasuk is to teach me that each step. The word chalkam is telling me that even the shirayim. So now we're down from the same thing. Maybe the entire pasuk is only meant to tell me that the shirayim is overlap. How do I know it's to tell me the other thing? If it was just to tell me the shirayim, the order of the pasuk would be backwards. Come to teach you two things. Now, so the source that you're over alav for every step is because the pasuk loisiasa chametz, which is the klal, and then loisiafa is specified to tell me just like afia is one step, you're over alav. So to any step you're over alav, even if you don't do the whole thing. Ema afia deparat la rachmana l'chayev chada inach l'chayev chada akula. Maybe you're over alav for baking, but every other step you're only over if you do the rest. Meaning, maybe if I do baking, I'm over alav, but if I don't bake, I'm only over alav if I knead it and if I braid it and I have to do everything else. So maybe it's not every step. It's baking is one category and everything else in the other category. The answer is because this is the rule davar shahaya b'chlal, that you have a klal and something was included in the klal v'yotzim in a klal lamed, and it was specified. So the klal is do not make chametz loiseyasa chametz. Then the pasuk specified a prat which is loiseyafa. It's not coming out to tell you about its own. It's coming to teach you for the entire general statement, which is just like the entire process has to be like baking, and just like baking is one step and you're ever alav, so to everything you're ever alav. Okay, so the loseyafa is specified to tell me that you're ever alav for one of the steps. Says the Gemara, why isn't this a classic klalu prat? You have the klal, which is do not make chametz. The prat is loseyafa, and ein b'chlal masher b'frat. Only over for what's the specification, which is baking, and not everything else. So why is this not a classic klal and prat? Ve'ema lo seyase klal, lo seyafe prat, klalu prat, ein b'chlal l'masher b'frat, afia in midechrin aloi, that you're only over for the prat, which is baking. So the Gemara says, I'll tell you why. Mishum dehavi klalu prat, murchakim zeh b'zeh, v'chol klalu prat, murchakim zeh b'zeh, ein don oisa b'chol prat. The reason why it's not a klalu prat is because they're not in the same parsha. Lo seyase chametz is in parshas Vayikra, and Lo Siyaf is in Tzav. They're not in the same parasha. We do not say a klal prat if they're not together. Klal prat, they have to be next to each other. Says the Gemara, is that true? Some say Rabbi Barava asked this question. There was no author for this question. There's no klal prat if they're not together. Tanya, but there's a brisa. Now this is a long brisa, and we're going to come back at the end. The brisa is talking about where do you shecht a chatas. Now we know that the oil is shechted in the north of the Azara. The pasuk says regarding the nasi. Now this is in Vayikra. It says v'shachar oisai b'makam asher yishchar es ha'oila lefnei Hashem, that you shech the chatas nasi of the nasi's chatas where you shech the oila. It's a chatas, but you shech to where the oila is. So the pasuk is basically telling you very clearly, heichon oila shechtas, where is the oila shechted b'tzafon in the north? Avzeh b'tzafon. So to the chatas of the nasi is in the north. Good. Now, so the pasuk tells me that the chatas of the nasi is in the north because the pasuk basically says it outright. And the Gemara Sakasha, v'chi anu mekan l'midin. This is all part of the brisa. Is this the source that the chatas is in the north? But isn't the next parsha, there's a general pasuk. The pasuk says, all chatos are shechted in the same spot as the ola, which is the north. I already know this. So why does the pasuk have to specify it by a nasi? It says the Gemara halam as a yotze. So why does the nasi's chata specified? L'koiva, to tell me shem loy shachar oisa b'tzafim psalim. The one pasuk is to tell me, the pasuk generally about a chata tell you it has to be in the north. This pasuk is telling me if you don't do it in the north, it's pasul. Meaning it's not just l'chachila, it's ma'akiv. Okay, good. So far so good. So far not related. Then the Brisa says the following line: Ata oimer l'kach yatzasa. You tell me that's why the pasuk specifies it by the nasi to tell me it's ma'akiv. Ayena ela shezeton safin ve'inachaton safin. Perhaps the pasuk is telling me not all chatos need the north, only the nasis. Meaning maybe the nasis is being specified to tell me that only this one has to be in the north to the exclusion of all of the chatos. Tamalomar. Therefore, there's a third pasuk. B'shachar esachatas b'makom asher yishchad esaola zebana av l'chol chatos shetuna tzafon. So if not for this third pasuk, I would say that the chatas, the nasi's chatas is the only chatas shechted in the north. That's how the brisa ends. So let me ask you a question. Says the Gemara, time of the kasher chumana b'shachar is the chatas. Halav hachi havamina shezeton safon ve'inachaton safon. You're telling me that there's a havamina, that maybe the reason why the pasuk specifies that the chatas of the nasi is in the north is because only that one's in the north to the exclusion of everything else. But there's three psukim here. Let's put the last one aside. You have a pasuk that says in Vayikra that the nasi's chatas is in the north. Okay. The question is, why do you need that in the next parasha in Sav? It says all chatos in the north. It says Gemara. Because I'll tell you what, I would think that maybe only the chatas and the nasi's in the north to the exclusion of all others. How can it be exclusion of all others? How's that possible? There's a general pasuk that says all chatos in the north. How could it be that the chatas and the nasi undoes that? Says the Gemara. My time, what would the mechanism be? La mishum dehave klal uprat. It must be that there's a klal uprat. There's the klal that all chatos in the north. There's the prat of the nasi's chatas and ein b'chal ma'avar prat, which means that the specification is king. Only the nasi's. Now this is a case of a klal and prat. They're not in the same parsha. One's in Vayikra, one's in Sav. So you see that we have a klal prat even when they're not together. Says the Gemara, wait a minute. This is not a klal prat anyway. Why? Which is the prat? The nasi's chatas. Which is the klal? The general chatas. Which is written first? What's written first is the nasi's chatas. It's not a klal prat. It's actually a pratu klal. If you want to be more specific, Maskar Rav Ashi, hai klal pratu klal hu v'nasa klal moisif ala prat v'srav l'kol mili. But this is actually an example of a prat and then a klal, not a klal and then a prat. And when the prat comes first, it's actually incredibly inclusive. So we're back to forget about it. So we still have this rule of we don't say a klal prat if they're not in the same parsha. Good. But now we're just bothered by this new question, which is, how could I think that the nasi's chatas is the only chatas in the north when there's a special pasuk that says all chatos in the north? Says Gemara, I'll tell you why. Because the nasi's chatas says oso. Oso means only this one to the exclusion of others. Elotana oso kakashale hachi kamar ein elishazeton savin achatot savin takasachman oso. Therefore, there's a third pasuk that says no, the all chatos are in the north. So you have one pasuk that says the chatos of the nasi. One pasuk says all chatos, but the problem is the chatos of the nasi says oso. So it might be saying that only that one. The answer is third pasuk says no, all chatos. So the question is, so what do you do with oso now? So what does oso coming to exclude? If a chatas of a nasi is stuck in the north, then what is oso excluding? The answer is lemute nachshon shachad of pesach semen. So we're going to start this. We're not going to be able to finish this, but we'll start it. What does oso come to exclude? Again, the chatas the nasi says oso is in the north to the exclusion of what? All chatos in the north. Oso b'tzafon ve'ein sar nachshon b'tzafon. Attempt number one is nachshon ben Aminadav. Nachshon ben Aminadav brought a chatas. By the inauguration, he was the nasi. This is a unique chatos because it was not coming for a sin. It's part of the inauguration. So ben tzafon, only the nasi's chatos is in the tzafon, but not the nachshon ben Aminadav tzafon is not in the north. Why should I think that it's in the north? Says the Gemara. Yeah. So you might think, you might think, because it's not really a chatas. I mean, we call it a chatas, but it wasn't due to a sin. So you might think that because it has smicha like other chatos, l'srabi namlin safon, meaning, as we'll see in a moment, there's a source that says that you do smicha on this nachshon ben Aminadav did smicha, so you might think because it does smicha, it also requires to be shechted in the north of the Azara. Kamash Malon, no, it's not shechted in the north. Well, it says, no, wait a minute. Smicha gufa minolan. How do I know that you have smicha on this nachshon ben Nadav chatas? The Tanya v'samachas yado al rosh seir l'rabas sar nachshon l'smicha. The pasuk says that the nasi, meaning there's a pasuk says that the nasi would lean on his chatas. And this is the source for Nachshon ben Nadav. So you might think that because we're connecting the two karbanos, it should also be shechted in the north. Nachshon ben Nadav was not shechted in the north. But smicha, what's the source? Because it says v'samachas yado rosh seir l'rabas sorry Nachshon ben Nadav div Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda is the one who said that Nachshon ben Nadav would lean on his chatas. Rav Shimon actually disagrees. He actually says no, it's for the chatas of an oivik kachavim. If you did avodah zara, the communal avodah zara, they did smicha. Fine, but the point is, according to Rav Yehuda, who says that they did smicha by Nachshon ben Nadav from this pasuk, you might think that you also have to shecht in the north. 2 points. We'll end with this. Maskar Ravina tinach Rav Yehuda. First of all, there's only a havamin according to Rav Yehuda. Only Rav Yehuda who says that there's smicha. You might think that there's shechting in the north, but according to Rav Shimon, there's no shech in Nachshon ben Nadav. So what is also coming to teach me? And Amalei Rezucha Brei Ravmari L'Ravina more L'Ravina Nami, even according to Rav Yehuda, my disrabi yisrabi, my disrabi lo yisrabi. Why do I need a pasuk to tell me don't shecht in the north? You're saying why? Because there's smicha. You might think there's also shchita in the north. There's smicha because there's a source for smicha. If there's no source for shchita in the north, I don't need a pasuk to exclude it. That which you have, you have. That which you don't have, you don't have. And if you want to say, well, if not for this pasuk, I would just compare it. All chatos are the same. Smicha guvelish to kramine. Well, the very fact that you need a pasuk to tell me that there is smicha indicates this is not a normal chatas. So the fact that you need a pasuk to tell me that there's smicha indicates it's not a normal chatas, and because there's no source that there's shchita in the north, I wouldn't think there's shchita in the north. So oso is now rendered useless again. So back to the original question, which is what are you doing with oisait coming to exclude? I will stop here, pick it up tomorrow.